each and every one of you for attending and extending your hospitality. As introduced, I'm Dr. Peter McCullough. I'm in practice as an internist and cardiologist, just a traditionally trained physician. And like actually your last speaker, I trained at UT Southwestern, and Donald Sullivan was my chairman as well. And we've all been influenced by our teachers over time through our training and through our observation of advances in medicine. But unlike maybe some of you in the room, I did not see this pandemic coming. I was blindsided by this, completely taken by surprise. Had no idea that there were pandemic preparedness planning events going on. Had no idea that legislation had been passed indicating there were going to be pandemics and indicating there were going to be government countermeasures put into place that must be adhered to and free of liability. I had no idea. Did any of you see this ahead of time? Did any one of you post a commentary about the Johns Hopkins SPARS pandemic tabletop planning exercise in 2017? You did. Okay. One person. I don't think any of us were paying attention, but boy, we're paying attention now. There's no doubt about it. All of us are there. The published data are that 97% of us have either had the infection, the SARS-CoV-2 infection, or taken a vaccine, or both. That means that our bodies in this room have been exposed to the SARS-CoV-2 spike protein, whether we like it or not. This very unnatural protein on the surface of the virus that was designed in the Wuhan Institute of Virology Chinese biosecurity lab. And there it is. The spike protein is the spine on the surface of the virus. It has 1,255 amino acids. It's encoded by 3831 base pairs. It was genetically designed by Ralph Barrick at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. The plans for this was shuttled over to China by Peter Daszak at EcoHealth Alliance. This was all funded and organized by Dr. Anthony Fauci, and Dr. Xingling Li in Wuhan, China, did the work in her lab, with Daszak going back and forth very frequently to get this protein to lock into a human H2 receptor, invade a humanized respiratory epithelial tract of a mouse, and kill the mouse. This was published in 2015 in Nature Medicine, and in 2016 in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Science by Menachery. Those are the two papers. And the title of the paper includes a SARS-like Wuhan Institute of Virology 1 COVID virus poised for human emergence. They announced to the world in 2015 and 2016 that their work, years leading up to this, was successful. These two papers will not be brought up by the House Select Committee in Congress for the investigation of coronavirus. I've messaged Fred Wentzel many times. I was on national TV with Fred Wentzel. I put it right there. They will not touch this. They will not touch this. You know, we have a prohibition on the development of bioweapons in the United States. So I use the term biological threat just so I don't cross with government agencies. However, our National Security Agency, on its website today, you go check it out right now on your phone, says that SARS-CoV-2 likely came out of this lab, but it wasn't a bioweapon. Why did they put in that proviso? The units in our government that are developing biological threats and the answers to them are BARDA, a unit of the National Institutes of Health, and DARPA, a unit of the military. We don't hear about nuclear arms races anymore, but we hear about biolabs, because the groups that hold the threats and they hold the answers, and this was the goal, I believe, of the U.S.-Chinese collaboration, They hold power. Peter Daszak at the EcoHealth Alliance, who now has been barred from federal research, has said this, that they want to have a portfolio of these threats, dozens of them, and have a portfolio of answers. It's power. And this first one got the whole world sick, including us. So this spike protein is now, as our body's been exposed to it, the ball is the nucleocapsid, and there are 4 beta coronaviruses that could give us the common cold, but never invasive fatal disease. But the spike protein we have found, I think, is probably the most deleterious protein in the history of mankind, potentially in the history of the world. Kind of makes staphylococcal toxin be manageable, or a mycotoxin, or an aflatoxin. But this form of toxin gets into the body. It itself, as I'll share with you, is lethal. In high doses, lethal within a few hours. It was a gamble to devise the genetic code for the spike protein, as if the infection was bad enough, to design the genetic code for the spike protein and then inject it in the human body as a vaccine and produce unlimited quantities of the spike protein for an undetermined duration of time. This was the gamble of all time. You're looking at the only public figure in the world who called it before the vaccines came out. And in this op-ed, I was really questioning the strategy and resources and efficacy, and really didn't have an understanding of how unsafe they would be. But in this widely read journal, The Hill, for the House, the Senate, and White House, the great gamble of the COVID-19 vaccine development stands as the only written piece on this topic. You can't find another person, not even Robert F. Kennedy. Everybody bought into this. Everybody was in this trance-like fear. They were conditioned over the course of 2020 to accept this vaccine. People lined up in droves in cars to get this, in a fear-driven trance to get one of these precious vaccines. Never before had the human body been injected with a foreign genetic code for a foreign pathogenic protein, with no idea where it goes in the body and with no idea how it was going to be shut off. It was an extraordinary proposition. We have learned so much. Now there are thousands of papers on it. This is by Escobedo Lighthouse, New Mexico, showing that the messenger RNA is pseudo-uridinated to make it very resistant to RNases. It produces the spike protein once inside cells. The ribosomes read it. They produce copious amounts of the spike protein, which is not supposed to be inside cells, and certainly not supposed to be expressed on cell surfaces, let alone in the bloodstream. But because the ribosomes are trying to read these wobbles with a pseudo-uridine, which is not a natural ribonucleic base pair, that there are frame-shifted proteins, probably about a dozen of them produced. Little peptides, without any knowledge of what they're going to do in the body, but you can imagine the body will recognize the spike protein for sure as foreign, and the frame-shifted proteins. So everybody who took one of these shots, for sure, has some degree of autoimmunity. Has to, because now the body is on an immune attack of proteins, which are not only in the cytosol, but they are on cell surfaces. Perry and colleagues from Australia, using the Pfizer biodistribution data, have shown us and reproduced for us that the vaccines, because they're loaded on lipid nanoparticles, go everywhere in the body, everywhere in the human body. Everywhere a tissue can be sampled, there is the installation of the genetic code and the expression of the spike protein, probably frame-shifted peptides. It's just a matter of how much and where, and because the hematologic distribution in blood flow in a few hours after taking it in the arm becomes the gamut That's actually what happens in each person. If there is a hemodynamic preference for the heart, let's say in an exercising athlete, there's probably loading in the heart. Brain, reproductive organs, and then it can't be every cell, but there must be a mosaic of cells that start to produce the spike protein. The spike protein now, in this paper by Brodner and colleagues from Germany, the Pfizer and Moderna spike protein can be identified because there is a proline insertion that holds the spike protein open in the pre-fusion conformation. So this is the conformation where the spike protein, before it fuses with the H2 receptor. The pre-fusion, the full complement of this spike protein. Brodner took patients who were injected with Pfizer and Moderna and then measured, can they find this spike protein, which trimerizes, which actually makes a triple, like a rope in the bloodstream, and in about half of patients was able to detect spike protein in the bloodstream up to 6 months. No wonder people feel sick after taking one of these shots. Do you know about a third of people who take a COVID-19 vaccine are so sick they can't go to work the next day, in published studies? In our CDC vSafe data, which is 10 million Americans signed up to report their safety data, 7.7% of people were so sick in our country after taking one of these shots, typically sickest after the second shot, they went to the urgent care or the ER or were hospitalized. And the data are cohesive with reports from Sweden and from Denmark and India. We have never had a vaccine with this degree of toxicity in the modern era. Now, if we were to go back to the primordial smallpox vaccine, one could probably challenge that statement. The acute toxicity of this alone, the impressive toxicity of this, should have given everyone administering these vaccines pause, like something's wrong. Here are the data from Denmark, recently reproduced from Sweden. Verbeck Humanici, who I've had on my show recently. 3 different groups here. These are different lots of the vaccine. Let's take the yellow group first, and the same thing was found in Sweden. About a third of the vaccine batches, there are essentially no side effects. None. 0. Not even a sore arm. Not even a sore arm. The Robert Koch Institute, which is the CDC equivalent of Germany, has found the same thing. So we really hope for those of you in the audience who've taken the vaccines, or your loved ones, people in my family took it too, we really hope and pray they are in the yellow group. We really, really have to hope. It's as if nothing was in them. The green line, there are moderate side effects, and then the blue line is where all the action was. In the Denmark data, it was 4.2% of cases. In the Swedish data, it was actually much more. The blue line is almost exclusively the early batches. The early batches were smaller, and they appeared to be far more toxic. The companies were watching the safety reports, and they must have made some changes to make the vaccines have lesser side effects over time. So it is true, someone who got the very first COVID vaccines in 2021, early on, much higher risk for problems than someone who took it in 2022 or 2023. It's a very important concept. The earlier ones were far more toxic. What was going on? Maybe there was hyperconcentration of messenger RNA and aggregation of lipid nanoparticles. There's contamination of cDNA, process-related impurities, which are used. There's a circular DNA called a plasmid. It's the sort of thing E. coli. It's cranking out the messenger RNA, but it does so being promoted by a proto-oncogene activator called simian virus 40, which has an origin of insertion, replication, and an enhancer, and actually origin of insertion, and then antibiotic-resistant genes. And then there's visible contaminants. The Japanese returned millions of doses just because of visible contaminants early on. They could actually see things. The only FDA inspection I've actually seen was at Moderna's manufacturer, which is a biodefense contractor called Resilience, and the FDA was simply looking at the vials and identified visible crud in the vials, and that was the only inspection. Despite calls in Denmark, Sweden, the United States, no government in the world has opened up a vial and inspected it for quality, purity, and concentration of messenger RNA. There's worldwide refusal to inspect the vials. Yesterday there was a call in Canada to take the older vials, any older vials that are not the current boosters, and destroy them with no inspections. That should give anyone here in the audience or listening some degree of concern. That we inspect Tylenol, we inspect cheese from Mexico, we inspect talcum powder. But a vaccine which became tethered to people's freedom and to their jobs and to their future will not be inspected by any government in the world. What have we learned about the vaccines? It's been one news item after another, and it is 100% bad. There's never a good news piece on the vaccines. 4,000 papers now and innumerable reports about side effects, adverse events, cardiovascular, neurological, hematological, immunological. Hundreds of new disease syndromes. Talk about work for integrative medicine specialists and naturopaths and homeopathic doctors and family doctors and internal medicine doctors and specialists. It just keeps going and going and going. Between 5 to 10% of the U.S. population has a problem after they've taken the vaccine, a real new medical problem that is ongoing. Now, 75%, according to the COVID states program, 75% of the U.S. population took a shot. Revised CDC data, research data has it at 80%. Fortunately, 20% didn't. I didn't take one. Boy, it's the smartest medical decision I ever made. Tucker Carlson said the same thing when I went on his show. He's like, there's no way. Same thing with Joe Rogan. Novak Djokovic. We got a pretty good team of vaccine decliners, probably most people in the room. The CDC receives reports from doctors like me and you, where we have already determined the vaccine is the cause of the problem. It's called VAERS. I have patients in my practice die. If it's not related to the vaccine, I don't report it. But when they've taken the vaccine, and the vaccine is the cause of death, and I've made that determination, I report it to VAERS. Through February, we're at 18,655 deaths. As of close to today, we're nearly 19,000 deaths. These are deaths reported to the CDC, where by proxy of reporting, the vaccine is the cause of death, and the CDC has verified it and gotten the death certificate. These are certified deaths. And you can see 1,150 died the same day they took the shot in the vaccine center, or a few hours driving home, or at night. Another 1,225 died the next day after the shot. To this day, no public health official in the United States will review these data as I am with you. We have two presidential candidates, right and left. Neither will acknowledge this is happening. In FDA testimony, the underreporting of this, because in order to report a death, I have to know about it, I have to have the vaccine card, and I have to make the clinical determination. The underreporting factor on this of people who have taken these and sadly died and nobody knows what's happened, they literally are found dead, is 30. 30 times 18,655. We are approaching 600,000 deaths of Americans not acknowledged by both major political parties, whether you like one or the other. And this is a greater casualty count than the Civil War, than the World War. This is astonishing. These are deaths. They can't be retrieved. And to the best of our knowledge, they are due to taking one of the COVID-19 vaccines. This is the story of our lifetimes. A story of our lifetime. And then, of course, all the near misses, the hospitalizations, and the tragedies that go on. This VAERS system is legit. I report to it every day in my office as patients stream in. What do we know? Well, when autopsies are done, and this is our work, about 74% of the time, it's an obvious vaccine death. When an autopsy is ordered, a giant blood clot, it's obvious they were fine, they took the vaccine, a few days later they died of a pulmonary embolism, or it's obvious myocarditis. The Japanese, when they've done autopsies, have found the exact same thing. And these are the early deaths. The late deaths many times don't have autopsies. We've published a late death 18 months later, and it looks like the same thing. 2 papers now published by Nathaniel Mead, who's a former NIH staff writer, an epidemiologist. We have part 1 and part 2, have clearly analyzed this. So part 2 has got 400 references. And you can see the scale here. This is just myocarditis, making the clear point that the vaccine causes myocarditis, not the infection. That's been very, very carefully studied now. The infection does not cause myocarditis. That is a false narrative by the American College of Cardiology, the medical societies, the CDC, and it doesn't. There's not a single autopsy of a COVID patient who died in 2020 with myocarditis. Does not cause myocarditis. But the vaccines clearly do. And the observed harms far outweigh the theoretical benefits of a vaccine. Remember, a vaccine is only theoretical benefit. If I took a diphtheria vaccine, and I never came in contact with diphtheria, there's no benefit, right? It's just a theoretical thing. So with SARS-CoV-2, what happened over time, the reason why we're here today is because 3 things carried us through the pandemic. Early on, what saved lives in high-risk patients was early multi-drug treatment programs. It was the action of doing something instead of nothing. And really, no single drug was necessary nor sufficient. It took about 4 to 6 drugs, and people did all different types of things. On my show, I interviewed doctors from Asia that were using aromatic substances to just kind of bronchodilate and ease people through this without using other things. Not everybody got hydroxychloroquine or ivermectin. Others were using nasal sprays and gargles, various antihistamines. It was kind of game on for integrative medicine in the acute treatment of COVID-19. The sad part about this is only probably about 500 traditional doctors who carried the entire nation. We had 1 million doctors on the sideline that said, oh, well, we don't have large prospective randomized trials, and our government agencies tell us that we can't treat it. And the pharmacists weren't dispensing the drugs, and people started to die. We're so far along on the vaccine debacle, the World Council for Health, this is a good organization to follow, June of 2022, does a comprehensive review of every database in the world on vaccine safety and concludes the vaccines are not safe for human use. Pull them off the market. I'm a member of the World Council for Health. Their leader is the former lead consultant to the WHO. Physician-led, evidence-based, consensus-driven. That's as good as you're going to get. Listen, if the CDC and WHO disagree, let them disagree. We have an organization in 2022 that said to get them off the market. I testified in the U.S. Senate. I co-moderated the major panel on this, and I said it's in the congressional record. Pull them off the market. They're not safe for human use. Someone's got to make a call. Association of American Physicians and Surgeons outlines all the rationale. Point number 10, this is 2023, pull them off the market. This organization, if it doesn't have such a statement, a consensus-driven, evidence-based statement, ought to consider joining these 2 organizations. I think every single one of these organizations Do you know that some of the naturopathic societies, chiropractors and others, you know at the very beginning, they actually advised on vaccination. They advised on vaccination. It's okay. People were scared. We didn't know what to do. Now's the time for reversal and careful discernment. This idea of doubling down, tripling down, or making a statement back in 2020 and then backing off on it, we have to come around on this. This is very important. I think every society should come out with a statement. Everything I can tell about every disease that we see after the vaccine, and in fact every version of long COVID syndrome after the infection, is due to the spike protein. It's due to the spike protein. The Biden administration has spent $1 billion on long COVID. $1 billion on long COVID, and none of the projects consider the spike protein. It's a mystery. It's inflammation. It's oxidative stress. Let's do something other than handle the problem. The spike protein. It appears to be in the body for a long period of time, resistant to human proteases. Now we have long COVID syndrome, which is a panoply of gastrointestinal, constitutional fatigue, respiratory, cardiac, neuropsychiatric manifestations. The spike protein is clearly playing a role. The antibodies to the spike protein, which continually are being stimulated with repeated injections, may be playing a role because the antibodies initially are IgG1 and 2, which are good neutralizing antibodies. They tend to actually get fatigued out because of this continued stimulation, become IgG4, which are very ineffective, potentially pathogenic antibodies. It's a little unclear. I think it's more the spike protein. But it is very possible to have a vaccinated patient with very high antibodies against the spike protein, and they have essentially no protection. None. Of those with long COVID, don't be fooled. 70% in this report from Germany, it's due to the vaccine. Because don't forget, people got COVID, they took the vaccine. People took the vaccine and they got COVID because the vaccines don't work. So it's impossible to blame the infection and not blame the vaccine. With the infection, the body gets a relatively, if it's treated early, gets a relatively low dose of the spike protein, and what's found in the human body is the S1, the outer segment. Bruce Patterson at IncelsDX in 2 papers has shown that. In the vaccine, I showed you rodent data, it's the full-length spike. It's a different animal to get the vaccine than the infection. The vaccine gives the body way more spike protein than the infection. Now it's true, people early on, the severe infections in 2020, no vaccine, developed long COVID syndrome. It almost always was in hospitalized patients, and it was a decent proportion of them had persistent symptoms. An analysis from Chertow and colleagues from National Institutes of Health to this day has kind of jarred me in that when they looked at autopsies of people who died with COVID in 2020, died with COVID, 9 months later, they still had replicating SARS-CoV-2 virus in the human body, in the skin, in the eyes, the liver. This virus is in us for a much longer time than we think. It's not just a nasal swab and it's here and it's gone. We're probably getting this ubiquitous exposure to it over and over again. Like the previous speaker, like many of you, we are caught in this current time where we don't have large clinical trials to guide us. We don't have even, after $1 billion of US money spent on research, we don't even have a single strategy. We don't have a single protocol to follow. We're all trying to do something in our own office. This is what I do in my office, and I'm a cardiologist, so I'm seeing patients with the single greatest question on the table is, are they going to have a cardiac arrest? That's kind of, I love it. I'm dealing with this. What do? I do an initial evaluation. I characterize how many times they've had COVID and what genre, well documented, how many vaccines, the brands and the doses, and then I try to risk stratify them. If they're completely asymptomatic, have had minimal exposure, unvaccinated, or if they're vaccinated, no injection site reaction or systemic reaction, they're probably low risk. I mean, we are addressing a massive population who fall onto this slide. We can't do tests on every single person, walking in our country. We have to have some approach. However, if they don't fall into this low-risk category, we measure the quantitative antibodies against the SARS-CoV-2 spike antigen as a proxy for the amount of spike protein in the body. Now, obviously, it's an antibody response. It does fall off over time, typically over a year. These curves have been published. But the quantitative spike antibody test, I think, is a fundamental tool for the office. We use the LabCorp extended range. It's the Roche Alexis is the underlying assay. And it reports a number. It's called arbitrary units, AU. And under 1,000, based on the published studies, is low risk. It is low risk. It's hard to find anybody in trouble when the antibodies are below 1,000. That's been my experience in the office. It's been the experience in the published literature. However, greater than 1,000, it's kind of game on for complications. It's, again, a proxy for how much spike protein is either in the system or has been in the system. To give you an idea, normal on this assay is less than 1. Low risk, 0 to 1,000, high risk over 1,000. If you've had multiple episodes of COVID, you've been seeing a lot of people face-to-face, you're going to be elevated. I checked myself, and I'm between 2,000 and 3,000. I've had COVID 3 times, and I've done a ton of face-to-face work with patients. Now, what I do in cardiology, when this whole evaluation of chest pain, dizziness, am I at risk for cardiac arrest, I do orthostatic vital signs, physical exam, and ECG in the office. Home monitoring, I typically recommend a Cardia or an Apple iWatch. I've really gotten away from ordering these Holter monitors or Zeo monitors. The labs that I order are the high sensitivity troponin, BNP, galectin-3, and D-dimer. Okay? Now, in people who've had syncope or abortive cardiac arrest or super high risk, I ordered an arrhythmia cardiomyopathy genetic panel that is offered by Invitae. Okay? In the office, I do echocardiography, which is a point-of-care echocardiography, and I'm largely looking for a gross left ventricular dysfunction or pericardial effusion or both. And then the cardiac MRI is really based on the findings. Now, if I get them in the pink box, and there's no suspicion of myocarditis, the testing is unremarkable, low risk chest discomfort, exercise intolerance, it's office primary care, and I have an approach there. But listen, people walking around with elevated BNPs, troponins, ejection fractions less than 55%, big pericardial effusions, I get an MRI. When the MRI has greater than 15% of the left ventricle involved with inflammation, they're at high risk for sudden death. They actually should be referred to an electrophysiologist. If this was sarcoidosis, they would actually get a prophylactic ICD. And so I do have vaccinated patients who are at high risk with ICDs. Thus far, those who have ICDs have actually all had resuscitated cardiac arrest. But I think in the future, we'll start to see prophylactic ICDs. What should we do about this spike protein? So in the absence of any other suggestions, what we did is we published a protocol based on what we had learned. The Japanese have been eating natto, which is a fermentation product of soy, for over 1,000 years. There's cardiovascular benefit. And natto kinase, which is this natural enzyme derived from this process, is a thrombolytic. It's an absorbed thrombolytic. And the work by Tanakawa, I think, was seminal, clearly showing in intact cell models and cell lysate models, natto kinase dissolves the spike protein. It proteolytically degrades the spike protein where the human body can't do so. Tanakawa's gone forward. He actually can measure natto in the blood. So when you actually do take natto kinase capsules, it actually does get absorbed in the bloodstream. The key thing is to take it on an empty stomach. Now, we initially recommended 2,000 units twice a day, or 4,000 cumulatively. The Chinese came in with a study at 10,000 units a day. Dr. Jordan Vaughn, who just testified in Congress, he's running the biggest vaccine blood clot center in the nation in Birmingham. He's using 16,000 units of nattokinase a day. Now, the safety limit on natto that I'm aware of is 80,000 units a day, where we start to have spontaneous bleeding, really trouble, GI toxicity. So we're still way below the safety level. I'm commonly recommending 4,000 fibrinolytic units or 8,000 fibrinolytic units of nattokinase. It's 100 milligrams equals 2,000 units. So I tend to just use the units. Bromelain is next up in our search for how can we get rid of the spike protein. It's an enzyme derived from the stems of pineapple. It's actually a family of enzymes. And in this model that we published, where bromelain works, where the B is, it works and it is an anticoagulant. It prolongs the prothrombin time. It is proteolytic. It's not directly thrombolytic. Inhibits the bradykinin effect on fibrin. And there's no doubt about it that bromelain is almost certainly going to play a role. And again, the studies have demonstrated it does degrade the spike protein. And here are the data here in the summary of this, that bromelain has a blood level, just an hour after you take it. The safety limit on bromelain, they believe, is about 12 grams a day. Our starting dose was 500 milligrams a day. We're probably low on bromelain. But in fact, bromelain, got into our protocol because it had positive data. Bromelain, just so you know, is an FDA-approved drug. It's actually an ointment that's used in the burn unit to help dissolve these thick proteinaceous eschars in deep tissue wounds. So bromelain is actually a drug given topically. It's an oral supplement. Now, nattokinase and bromelain are oral supplements over the counter that you can order on Amazon or at natural stores or have in your office. Curcumin was the third one, and I was impressed with curcumin because the Indians were doing so much research with curcumin in acute SARS-CoV-2, and it's derived from turmeric. And what they demonstrated, study after study, is that it does block, like other things, it does block the spike protein. I don't think it doesn't help get rid of it, but it helps block some of the effect of the spike protein. And in this meta-analysis of randomized trials, there was no doubt about it. It had a therapeutic effect in COVID. There's been randomized trials in long COVID and post-vaccine. Curcumin plays a role, an evidence-based role in long COVID. A lot of people take it for its anti-arthritic figures. The key with curcumin is to get it absorbed. And there, either liposomal, nanotechnology, or combining it with biopurine or piperine are the mechanisms by which it's absorbed. So we put this all together. We published this in the Springer Nature Cureus Journal of Biomedical Sciences, that we should use these three together. It's the same principle with early treatment. It's a proposal. Let's give a cocktail, if you will, that has the best chance of helping the body aid in clearance of the spike protein, that is thrombolytic and anticoagulant, because almost everybody in this room and in the world right now is hypercoagulable. And I don't know about you, but in my office, I am seeing thrombi and blood clots on a daily basis. People come in, and I just discover them. They seem to be everywhere. And these are years after the shots, even years after having COVID. I think because the spike protein has tilted the calculus from the balance between thrombosis and antithrombosis, leading us towards thrombosis. And so the proposal is to start oral detoxification, nattokinase, bromelain, and curcumin together in between meals, and have patients. And we started this now about 2 years ago. We're carefully observing patients, and we call it a base because it's the base of what we do. It's not exclusively what we do. We add other things. Some people say, well, what about vitamin C? I said, bring it on. What about ozone? Bring it on. What about hyperbaric oxygen? For sure. What about, saunas and sweating, detoxifying that way? Sure. But it's a base. And I've seen other people say, well, I just give N-acetylcysteine. I said, what do you do about the spike protein? Now, I'm not so sure until I see real strong evidence. I'm not sure the body can get rid of this. This is You know, when Borrelia, in a case of Lyme, invasive Lyme, when Borrelia burgdorferi installs its proteins in the body has a hard time clearing it. That's the reason why people get sick. When syphilis gets in the body, there's remnants of syphilis in the brain and the aorta for decades. The body has a hard time getting rid of certain pathogens. This is in this category. This SARS-CoV-2 spike protein is a killer. It directly injures tissues. It induces autoimmunity. It's found in the blood clots. It's found in the blood clots. I didn't cover it today, but SARS-CoV-2, by modeling, impairs the P53 and the BRCA cancer immune surveillance systems. It's the most pathogenic thing we've seen, and we can't seem to get it out of the body. Our observations, careful observations, we intend to publish everything we can, is that slowly over time, patients do clinically resolve. We see the antibodies ebb down over time, but it takes time, probably a year or more. We've treated some of these horrible motor tremulous syndromes, and after about 6 or 9 months, they're just out of it. I saw an orthopedist the other day, just chest pain and dizziness and palpitation. It's just kind of resolved. Now, my go-to drugs on these syndromes are as follows. If it's chest pain, subclinical myopericardis, which I think that's really what we're talking about. The MRI cannot see every patch of inflammation. So it's probably subclinical myopericardis. My go-to add-on drug is colchicine. Because A, it's mandatory in myocarditis and pericarditis anyway. The guidelines say we have to use it. And B, it was widely used during COVID and very effective. There was a meta-analysis of all meta-analysis published on colchicine. There was over 30% mortality reduction with COVID. So you should be prescribing a ton of colchicine in clinical practice if you have all these patients with vague chest pain, palpitations, and other symptoms, as I do. Now, recently, last year, the FDA widely expanded the application and the licensure for colchicine for prevention of coronary heart disease as an anti-inflammatory for atherosclerotic plaque. So you're going to probably see a colchicine reigning in the population. The good news is, instead of twice a day with some GI toxicity, we can use once a day. And so much less GI toxicity. So colchicine, very common add-on drug.
What
0.6 milligrams a day. Europeans use 0.5. If the autoimmune screen is positive, the ANA, the rheumatoid factor, the anti-citrulated peptide, the go-to drug in my practice is hydroxychloroquine for a long period of time. I don't mess around with this. ANA's at 1 to 160, and vague symptoms, hydroxy. We seem to be able to kind of shut this off before it really evolves into some horrific arthropathy or some other problem. And again, hydroxychloroquine, over 400 supportive studies to cure COVID. If there is a headache, a cranial nerve syndrome, trigeminal facial nerve syndrome, glossopharyngeal, if there is skin rash, this is very important. If the vaccine syndrome is an itchy, painful skin rash, like you, after weeding through lots of things, lots of steroids, and I've tried lots of things, the go-to drug, if there are headache, kind of craniofacial and skin rash, the go-to drug in my experience is ivermectin. For some reason. Now, it may be persistent SARS-CoV-2 infection. I always ask people about night sweats, skin rash. If I feel some adenopathy, that's kind of good enough for me for ivermectin. How long do I use it for? 90 days. 90 days, 0.6 milligrams a day. So I saw a man the other day, sweaty, all kind. What's that?
0.6.
0.6, yeah. So for him it was 48 milligrams. Someone my size would take 36 milligrams. Okay, that's my kind of go-to strategy. Ivermectin, yeah. So, lastly, this vague loss of mental clarity, which I think is a better way to describe it than brain fog. Loss of mental clarity, numbness and tingling, post-exertional malaise. My go-to product, again, one peer-reviewed publication on this, nicotine patch. Nicotine patch. In my practice, seeing hundreds if not thousands of patients, I've seen one smoker with long COVID. One. Smokers have had a breeze through COVID, maybe because of this chronically elevated nicotine levels, which antagonizes the spike protein. We don't know what happens from there. But remember, for a smoker, for nicotine withdrawal, nicotine, getting people off smoking, smoking cessation, we use 21 milligrams a day. That would be Habitrol step 1. For a non-smoker, in this application, 7 milligrams. 7 milligrams topically, once a day, take it off, replace. I've given it a try, and I've been impressed. That's my clinical observation, supported by one peer-reviewed paper. So to finish and conclude, both SARS-CoV-2 infection and the COVID-19 vaccination contribute to spike protein accumulation in the body. Spike protein is pathogenic, thrombogenic, and in my view is a therapeutic target. Now, if you can give antioxidants or ozone or something else and get the body to efficiently clear it, and you can demonstrate that, bring it on. However, I think this proteolytic approach is I know it's well tolerated because I've done it, countless numbers of times in my practice, and I think it's got a strong scientific rationale to have it be a base, and then do your additional integrative therapies for it. Additional therapeutics added depending on the syndrome. Now, I checked clinicaltrials.gov. There are no registered large randomized trials. There's no randomized trials at all for nattokinase, bromelain, and curcumin registered clinicaltrials.gov. I do large randomized trials. I love randomized trials. I would love to do one. It's going to take about 4 to 20 years to do that. That's the problem. We don't have enough time. This is the gamble of a lifetime. Do we leave patients with spike protein in their body the best we can tell and just give them vitamin C or ozone or something? Or do we actually start to clear this stuff out of the body? Do we make our best attempt? Shortly, we're going to have an assay to directly measure the spike protein, and I anticipate that will be the most widely used test in internal medicine. I think it's going to be very revealing when we can directly measure it. I'm Dr. Peter McCullough. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much for such an enlightening presentation. Just one thing about the testing for the quantitative antibodies. LabCorp, their max is 2,500. It doesn't go, or not LabCorp, sorry, I don't know what the limit is on LabCorp.
No, call LabCorp and request them to extend it to 25,000.
Okay.
With your LabCorp account, remember, it's the same assay, it's just what they report. What they'll give you in the standard package is up to 2,500. You call them and say, listen, with my account, I went up to 25,000. You want to see that full range.
Okay, and just so everybody knows, Quest will not go above 250, and Path Labs will do up to 2,500. So LabCorp is the go-to for measuring quantitative antibodies.
Most are using the Roche Alexis. Be on the lookout for Invitrogen, which has the quantitative assay, and then there's a couple more companies coming along. There was a lab in Oklahoma that had measured spike antigen in the blood, and a lot of it's attached to RBC, so there's a whole blood assays. And in thousands of patients, he said, it's the most revealing test he's ever seen. And I said, well, where is it? Why come we can't measure this test? He said the FDA is blocking it.
Oh. Not surprised, not surprised. Thank you again. I know we have a lot of questions, so we'll start here.
I attended a vaccine conference in Fort Worth in 2011 where Kennedy spoke, and ivermectin was brought up, and some of the experts there were saying that ivermectin also neutralizes the spike protein. What's your opinion on that?
Ivermectin, I think, neutralizes it in the sense where it blocks it, but it doesn't schedule it for disposal. I think the most obvious use of ivermectin is in the acute infection. So the body is fighting enough. Ivermectin blocks the spike protein, blocks nuclear entry of the virus, and actually favorably influences some of the innate immunity of the cell. That's the reason why you get such a pop with ivermectin. A lot of you, like I have, you get an acutely sick person with pulmonary COVID, and they are sick as anything. If you hit them hard with ivermectin, it does have this miraculous effect. I've used all the drugs. I've used a lot of hydroxy, a lot of ivermectin. I've used Paxlovid, I've used molnupiravir, I've used them all. I think the most dynamic drug we have is ivermectin. and many of you I think would agree, in the right dose because of that. So I think ivermectin can, in a sense, terminate the symptomatic infection. But in this kind of long COVID, some of these people have had symptoms for a couple of years. It's just, I've tried ivermectin in a lot of applications. I think the ones I outlined for you, that's where it's responsive. I've tried it with some others, and people come back and say, listen, it didn't do anything. So I think it's the cutaneous, and maybe these syndromes that I'm describing, you guys, maybe it's because there's active SARS-CoV-2 replication. The skin infections, I am suspicious because of the Chertow NIH autopsy study. The skin rashes that you guys see, I am suspicious is persistent infection.
Speaking of the ivermectin, I've recently heard of something about the fertility damaging effects of ivermectin. Could you comment on that?
Yeah, there was, I think, an off-target report regarding interpretation of preclinical data. Ivermectin, I think we can be confident, doesn't influence fertility. It's actually used in veterinary medicine in horses and during horse breeding programs. And believe me, if the veterinary community saw any decrement in fertility, the comment, by the way, came from animal data, not human data anyway. So, the longest applications, the longest I've ever had someone on ivermectin myself is about 6 months. Maybe others, and we're talking daily ivermectin, not just twice a week. There are no human signals that it influences fertility. And don't forget, we're giving it in what context? With COVID-19 infection, of which there are data certainly on the male side that it may be fertility reducing, because SARS-CoV-2 infection can cause an orchitis, clinical and subclinical, and with the vaccine, which every paper published so far suggests it drops both male and female fertility.
How about the use of lumbrokinase?
Lumbrokinase, so the other enzymes that are attractive are lumbrokinase, a family of enzymes from worms, surreptase, and there's one paper on surreptase, a theoretical paper. All of these are attractive, we simply don't have the data. I think nattokinase in general is well tolerated. I mentioned bleeding as a caveat. I've had one hospitalization due to bleeding on the protocol, but he also had concurrent liver disease, severe liver disease. And then the other thing I've had, and it comes up occasionally, is a soy allergy. And I think none of the nattokinase is pure enough to be free of soy antigens, particularly in the manufacturing process. Yes, other questions? There's a lot of them.
Back here, sorry.
Yes. Oh, Becca.
Yeah. Are you familiar with the paper that was published in July? It was a Japanese study, peer-reviewed. It was published on these self-assembling nanobots that are happening in the shots. And they have pictures of what they're finding, including spirochetes and right-angled cubes and things like that.
Yeah, I've reviewed the paper. There is a paper examining what's called the visible debris. Remember I told you the Japanese returned vials of visible debris early on, millions of vials. These electron micrographs that they've taken, you can see actually like a spirochete type of thing. And to me, my interpretation is, I think those are metal shavings. So it's well described early on that the batches were small, that they used metallic beads in the process. Remember, process 1, there was no E. coli. It was actually making the naked messenger RNA. They used these beads, and you probably remember the reports of magnetism. Remember those? You don't hear about that anymore. That was probably real because of the visible debris. So I think what they're reporting is visible debris, and when you put things on a slide, but some people have taken this to another interpretation that there are self-assembling nanobots. I wouldn't go to that conclusion right away. Although I do have to say something, which is, I don't want to be too conspiratorial. But on the CDC's website, which is a treasure trove of information, when the COVID vaccines came out, do you know what they had on their website? They said, the COVID vaccines are safe and effective, and there's no nano trackers in them. On the CDC website. It's like, why do they say that? Anyhow, I feel my question, I have to catch a plane. Yeah,
Could you please address shedding as a way to share with others?
Okay, so shedding, what we know there, quickly, 2 papers by Hannah and colleagues have clearly shown the messenger RNA is in human breast milk, The messenger RNA does get through the blood, into the placenta, into the baby. The spike protein is in sweat and breast milk, so it's probably in secretions. The best papers written on shedding are by Helene Benoon, former INSERM scientist, who believes shedding is real. So if there was a concern, it would be in the 6-month period where spike protein is in the blood. Messenger RNA has been found in the blood for 30 days. So it's theoretical there could be this shedding. And the question is, where's the evidence? Well, the best evidence that exists is actually in women and menstrual periods. And there's enough reports on this of a woman who's premenopausal around somebody else who either has the infection or taken the vaccine and hasn't changed in their menstruation. There's been enough papers written on that where I think that's real. So that's probably form-first evidence of shedding. Now, if you go further and say, well, are we vaccinated from other people or vaccinated from kissing or sexual contact? I don't know. There has never been a proven case. How about blood transfusion? There's never been a proven case, but here's a few talking points on transfusion. Let's just take currently. Currently, from the start of this year to April, only 1.6% of Americans took one of these vaccines. 1.6. The hot period for messenger RNA is probably a month. The hot period for spike is probably 6 months. 1.6% of people took a shot. And the blood only stays on the shelf for 42 days. We don't know about filtration, cooling. There's just never been a case of transfusion related. There's a paper by Helma and colleagues, this will come out shortly, suggesting maybe there are a few reports in theirs. The summation of this is that I don't conjure up a lot of fear on this. It's an opportunity for a little wisdom, maybe for a man your age. And you can say, I advise safe sex techniques. It's going to apply for monkeypox too. Usually people reach out to me and say, Dr. McCullough, I had a date with somebody and they were vaccinated. And I usually respond, hope you use protection. Anyhow.
Thank you so
We're good?
much, Dr.
Okay.
McCullough.